Welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelsohn.
The Apostle Paul would be very comfortable at a Jews for Jesus meeting. A Jewish woman came in the shop today who has been around for some weeks and has been coming to Bible classes for now 8 months. And she loves Yeshua. She thinks he's the greatest thing. She thinks it's great that we're Jews and we follow Yeshua, but she doesn't want to be a Christian because she thinks Christian means the people who worship idols, people who have idols in their churches, who celebrate at churches, and she doesn't want to attend a meeting that we might have at a church. She's comfortable coming here to our bookshop and be with us and even study the Bible. If we went over to Westfield and did that, I'd be okay. But to do it in a church is uncomfortable. And I've been a believer now 40 years, and I forget until I talk to people like her that was my problem as well. Till I met Yeshua personally, until I called him Jesus, until I prayed and asked him to be my Savior, I thought they, Christians, were the bad guys. We, Jews, were the good guys. And though we might have friendships together, it's not going to be the same thing. The Apostle Paul would have been happy meeting with us here or meeting at the Wesley Church for our Yom Kippur service, which is where it's going to be, down in the city, or with the Jubilee Church where we have our One New Man fellowships. He would have been happy because the issue for him was never location, but who it was about whom we were speaking and whose we are when we think about ownership. And what he's going to teach throughout the whole book of this letter of the Corinthians is what he sums up in verse number 2 of chapter 2. He says, I determined to know nothing among you except Messiah Yeshua and him crucified. If anything's going to ring his bell, it's the for Jesus part of our conversation. And here he was, a Pharisee of the Pharisees, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, from the tribe of Benjamin, and circumcised on the 8th day. He wrote this letter. And he wrote this letter to the godless people of Sydney. It says Corinthians, but really it's written to us, because their sins are the same sins as we have. The exaltation of wisdom, which Corinth was known for, this idea of celebrating the cerebrum, as well as the sexual impropriety, which was rife all over. So a guy would go to a temple and be a priest at a temple, not a Jewish temple, but we can call it an Athenian temple, a Corinthian temple. And then that would be by day, and he would dispense wisdom, and at night he would hang out with the temple prostitute. It was what they did, and the temple prostitute would work the crowd and make money for the temple, which then paid for the priest's salary by day. It was a strange bedfellowing that they did. Here he is in chapters 1 and 2, knocking back this idea of wisdom and debaters, because he called it all folly, though he was well able to argue and reason with the best of them. Let's take a read through this. We read the beginning of chapter 1 last week. Let's read from verse number 10. Does he make it clear? He is so binary in this wisdom and knowledge and foolishness. There is one bit of life, and it comes from God. And anything that emanates from God, whether it's chachma or chaim or this word, that's it. By the way, the word wisdom, which is used again and again and again in here, is the word Sophia, a female word. Just like chachma in the Hebrew is a female word. And I like that the Greeks picked up wisdom as a female. I don't know why. I just think that's good, from borrowing it from the Hebrew idea. But this wisdom that comes from God is a mystery. It is not pedestrian. It's not book learning, though books help us. It is not mysterious in the sense of only the few have it, and if you pay them enough money, they'll dispense it to you, which was characteristic of the day. But it is available to all men, but it's not pedestrian. When I say that, I mean it's not Prost. Such a good Yiddish word. It's not common. You have to dig a little for it. You can't just say, oh, well, we all know these things to be true. Well, how do we get that? But by digging into the heart of God. I think that's what he's saying here. This is verse 8 of chapter 2, the wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood. Wow. Not one of the rulers of the first century, the Greeks, nobody. How does he know that? Because if they had, they wouldn't have killed the Lord of glory. So the Romans are guilty of not knowing speaking the simplest wisdom. But it's not about science, and it's not necessarily about philosophy he's speaking. What's he speaking of? The wisdom from God is summed up at the end of chapter 1. By his doing, you are in Messiah Yeshua. He became to us Sophia. He became to us righteousness, tzedakah. He became to us sanctification. That's such a good Bible word. And redemption. So that, just as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Now let's look at that text that we say is the quote here. It's Jeremiah chapter 9. Let's look at that and see from where Paul gets this. Verse 12 of chapter 9 of Jeremiah. So here's the conflict. Who's wise? Who thinks they're wise? Who thinks they understand all the things that are earlier in the chapter of Jeremiah 9? That my head were waters, my eyes a fountain of tears, that I may weep. I had the desert. They're wrong. Everybody's doing something wrong. Be on guard against your neighbor, verse 4. Everyone, verse 5, deceives his neighbor. They don't speak the truth. This is what's going on in the Jewish community. Your dwellings in the midst of deceit, verse 6. And God says, you don't even know what's going on because you're all deceiving each other with your tongues, verse 8. Their tongue's a deadly arrow, it speaks deceit. I'm going to punish you for this. Who is the wise man? So people are speaking, but their wisdom is folly, he says. He says, who can understand this? You've forsaken my law, which I set before you. So we are needing to be informed by Scripture so that we don't speak deceit and we hear what's right and wrong coming out of others. Wisdom from God is not mysterious in the sense of it's hard to find, but it's hard because we don't listen. We prefer listening to a current affair on TV and the latest entertainment news to find out who's sleeping with whom in Hollywood and these horrible things that we hear about and see. But look down at verse number 23 of chapter 9 of Jeremiah. I delight in these things. I'm the Lord who exercises loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on the earth. Pukadati, kol mul, chesed, mishpat, utzedakah. These are the characteristics of God in verse 23. Chesed, that's loving kindness and mercy. Mishpat, that's justice. Utzedakah, and that's righteousness. And these are the very things that we read in 1 Corinthians that Paul says that's how you're going to know wisdom. Because Yeshua came and became to us these things. So Yeshua is the one who will give us the information, but it's more than school. It's more than academic. Wisdom is not only knowledge. Knowledge is good. Don't knock it. I appreciate it. I'm glad we're studying the Bible here and we care about it. But it goes beyond knowledge to a point of wisdom. And a wise man, don't boast of your wisdom. If you want to boast in this, that you understand and know me, that you know God. That's end of the day. That's what Jeremiah says. So that, friends, is exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying back here in 1 Corinthians in chapter 1, 29 and 30 and 31. That no man should boast before God, but by his doing, God's doing this, you are in Messiah. He, Messiah Jesus, became to us the chokhmah, the tzedakah, and all these things that Jeremiah said about him, just as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. So you don't miss it. He even gives us the citation from Jeremiah 9. All around us, we're informed by pretty smart people, but I think we're some of the stupidest people on the planet. Why? Because we don't know how to get along with each other. We're so much more informed. YouTube and Wikipedia and all these things by which everybody communicates to each other. But the problem is we're letting a 9-year-old teach us morals instead of a 9-year-old just singing and we look at them on YouTube and we say, oh, isn't that cute? But then we put them on TV and we interview them and then we say, how do you think the world's going? What's going to happen in the world? And we start listening to a 9-year-old as if they know what the world is like. We do the same thing with a celebrity who plays drums. Remember, it all started for me with Ringo from the Beatles. I used to love the Beatles. I still enjoy a good Beatles tune on the radio. I turn it up, I roll down the window, and I start singing loud. But when the TV people of the BBC or in America interviewed Ringo Starr to find out his take on the world, you know, this guy could barely put a sentence or two together. He had an IQ of, 70? For whatever reason, Ringo was not the kind of guy, just because he was a celebrity, to interview and ask, how's there ever going to be world peace? But they did ask Ringo, and I thought he gave one of the stupidest answers. I don't know what it was, but to be fair, you know, that wasn't his bailiwick. In the United States, and now they do it in the world competitions, the Miss World and Miss Universe and all these. I remember growing up watching these Miss Miss America contest because the girls were cute and they had dresses that revealed more, and then the bathing suits that revealed even more, and I was a teenager, so I liked that. But then they would interview them for the important finalist question, what do you think is the most important thing on the planet? And they'd ask them. World peace was always number one. And if you could get anything, what would you do? Well, I tell everyone to put away their guns, or whatever it is. Just because someone's a celebrity doesn't mean they have wisdom. However, just because they're a celebrity doesn't mean they don't have wisdom. I don't want to knock anybody just because they're a celebrity. The issue then is not whether someone is of status, but what they're really saying and who they know. So that's in fact what he says in chapter 2, verse 1. I didn't come to you with great wisdom and superiority of speech, but I determined to know nothing among you except Yeshua, his messiahship, his crucifixion, which we know later from the letter in 1 Corinthians 15 includes the resurrection as well. So the whole gospel story. And I'm with you in weakness, fear, trembling. I didn't have much going for me. I just rocked up. We know he was there how long? At the most 3 years. He's there teaching them. And what he's teaching them is basic foundational stuff, which is great. And what he teaches them is that they should rely on God and God's strength, because we see that in verse 5, that your faith should not rest on my wisdom, but on the power of God. So I don't want you to be taught by me and kind of manipulated into believing this, because if I can get you to believe, then somebody smarter than me is going to get you not to believe. The point is not being clever, but being drawn to God. Because if you get connected to God, that's what he's saying, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord, that he understands and knows. That's what Jeremiah says. Verse 6, yet we do speak wisdom among those who are mature. So he's knocking wisdom, but he's not knocking wisdom, is he? He's saying, look, there's a time to teach certain things, and I'm happy to teach you. And remember, he's answering a letter that some people wrote him in answer to his first letter, which we don't have. So he's not knocking wisdom, and nor should any of us. I was at that conference with John Lennox. He's a brilliant mathematician at Oxford University. And I love the way he talked about reasoning and how Paul reasoned from the scriptures and reasoned with people. So it's not like saying, hey, I don't have any wisdom to tell you. Just believe. And it's not at all the way the biblical understanding of wisdom is. It's reasoning informed by the Bible that helps us put together our lives. How should we live? What should we do with one another? With that incident that happened when I encountered so-and-so outside that park in Darwin. What do I do? Well, the Bible informs me, so it gives me wisdom what to do, not only academically, but when I'm in the situation. What happens if your ox falls into your neighbor's yard, or your neighbor's ox falls into your yard on Shabbos? Well, wisdom is informed by the scriptures that it's okay to pull that guy out, to pull the ox out of there. Or if your neighbor falls in, it's okay to pull him out, even though it seems to break a law, because wisdom, that is what God says, will say, seeing things from God's point of view, informs us, and we should live in that, and we should reason with one another about that. We do speak wisdom among those who are mature, he says, but not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age. They are passing away. Does he make that clear, or what? That these guys not only got it wrong about Jesus, but they're dying and fading away. And we're going to be here for the long haul. How significant is that the Roman Empire, which was dominant in that day, is long gone, as he said, and the wisdom that Paul writes is still being read around the globe to this day, not only in Corinth, but in faraway places like Australia, Sri Lanka, and America. Things which eye has not seen. Where is that in verse 9? This is one of those things that I lean on about eternity. Paul is addressing it here and will again in another time. Isaiah 64.
For from days of old they have not heard or perceived by ear, nor has the eye seen a God besides you, who acts in behalf of the one who waits for him. You meet him who rejoices in doing righteousness, who remembers you in your ways. Behold, you were angry, for we sinned. We continued in them a long time, and we shall be saved. For all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a filthy garment, and all of us wither like a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind take us away.
Yeah, but God is our Father, verse 8. Yeah. We're the clay, he's our potter, and we're all the work of his hands. So he's not angry. Yeah, it's really great. So here he says in Isaiah 64, this notion, verse 6 is especially powerful for all of us. All of our righteous things, all of our trying to be holy, it looks like a woman's monthly garment. The filth, that's what the word means. That's how quality it is. We try to impress God and He's not impressed. We wither like a leaf. We're just blown in the wind. Our iniquities take us away. We are in deep trouble, but God's the one who can see to us. And that's what the message of Isaiah is over and over again. But verse 4 is our text just now. From of old they've not heard nor perceived by ear, neither has the eye seen a God besides thee, who acts in behalf of the one who waits for him. So Paul uses this as a reminder that the eye hasn't seen, the ear hasn't heard, nothing. We can't even imagine what awaits for us who long for him. He'll say that later on in the letter. And it is this text which is informing him. He's not translating it word for word, but he's calling on it. Even if I said to you things like, it's important for us, I'm just using an example. It's important for us to plan for tomorrow tonight because it was evening and morning the first day. What I'm saying is that Genesis informs how I should live my life today. And that's what Paul's doing. He's saying that the eye hasn't seen, the ear hasn't heard. And he's alluding to this passage in Isaiah 64, which then hearkens to us, this whole text, about men's wisdom being paltry, men's righteousness being nothing but a filthy rag. So when Paul alludes to this in chapter 2, verse 9 of 1 Corinthians, he's saying the whole chapter. If I say to you, all we need is love, I'm alluding to a Beatle reference. And I might hearken to you that whole song. If I say to you, I still call Australia home, then you start holding hands and rocking back and forth. I've been to London and all that. And you could just imagine the whole song because that word, that phrase, brings the whole poem to mind. That's what the Apostle Paul's doing here. So back to 1 Corinthians 2. Things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and which have not entered the heart of man. All that God has prepared for those who love him. Wow. There is something that's ahead. When people ask me what heaven's like, I say, we haven't even seen it. We haven't even thought it. We haven't even imagined what awaits for us. It's better than clouds, I'll tell you. It's got to be better than a private cloud with a harp. And that's okay for an hour or two, but it's a little too something, too medieval, too Italian, I don't know what it is, but we haven't even imagined it. And this then harkens back to Isaiah, and again he's going to shout about our own sinfulness. Verse 10, for to us God revealed them through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. Who can know you except you in your spirit? So who can know God except God? So we've received not the spirit of the world, which only the world has, but we've got the Spirit from God, that we might know the things freely given to us by God. What are the things? What are the things freely given to us by God? Verse 12, wisdom. We've got the wisdom from God. So we can know this not because we're so smart or because we've been hanging out with smart people, but because God informs us. God's trained us. And that's what he's appealing to. We can't get it from the rulers of the age. They crucified Yeshua. In fact, he says in verse 14 that these guys never will figure it out. Verse 14, a natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. They're foolishness to him. What's a natural man? The Greek word is psychikos, like psychic. So it's the natural man who can only dwell in the depths of his own personhood. And that's the contrast, the natural versus the spiritual. Natural man is a person who doesn't see things from God's point of view. All he can get is what's out there. And he's dismissed God. And when you do that, you are seriously on your own. You're a natural man, soulish man. And look at what it says about him. He doesn't accept the things of the Spirit of God. They're foolishness to him. In fact, he cannot understand them. Now, this is a tough one because they're spiritually appraised. They're spiritually evaluated. They're determined to be of value if you have a spiritual inclination. People come in here to the shop, and I get phone calls and emails all the time from people all over the world, most notably here in Australia. But they are seriously keen. You can see them literally leaning towards an understanding. And when people come in and they stand at the door and say, hey, what's this shop about? I'm never going to talk to them. And I say, please come in, we'll talk. I don't want to yell across the room. If they come in, then I seriously believe, are leaning. And their physical posture says, I'm willing to learn. And when you move your body towards a leaning position, you are saying, I'm willing to learn from you. It's not just I'm willing to learn, but I'm willing to learn from you. And if you're at the door and saying, hey, what is, forget about it. There's no leaning. Tuesday, I spoke at the Hillsong Bible College to 150 students. And I wrote in my Facebook later that day, I think it was the best class I'd ever taught during my 10 years I've been going up there and teaching once a year, because I saw, and I told people this, the students were leaning towards me. They had their Macintoshes open, and I don't know if they were doing Angry Birds or if they were studying or if they were reading along because I cited biblical texts and such. But honestly, they were leaning forward, and that puts them in the position of student. The natural man doesn't appraise the things of the Spirit with any kind of value, and he stands aloof from them. Now, here's a tough one, though. Look at that phrase in verse 14. How do you understand this? He cannot understand them. The natural man cannot understand them.
Can't see beyond the frame of reference of the earth and its natural things.
Okay, so an atheist perspective is going to be tainted so much that he cannot understand them. In fact, here's the King James on this. The natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they're spiritually discerned. He cannot know them. If that's true, then let me ask a question. Should you ever have an argument?
You can if there's respect and the will to reason things out.
Listen to these verses from the Bible. We read one, Isaiah chapter 1. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. Though there's red like crimson, they will be like wool. Listen to this from the book of Acts, chapter 17. According to Paul's custom, he went to the Jewish people and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures. Now here's the Apostle Paul, who would have said that they were dead in trespasses and sins. He would have said that they were in the natural mindedness. However, what did he do every Shabbat for 3 weeks as he went into Thessalonica? He came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews, Acts 17. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining, giving evidence that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead, saying, this Jesus whom I'm proclaiming to you is the Messiah. Some of them were persuaded and joined him. In chapter 18, he went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila. He came from Italy with his wife Priscilla. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with Priscilla and Aquila, and they were working by his trade. They were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. That was in Corinth. So here he is saying, Acts chapter 18, verse 4, I didn't reason in human wisdom. I reasoned according to the Scriptures. But he's reasoning with people, or arguing, we could say, who were unbelievers. But they were leaning. And if somebody's leaning, then you can have a discussion. A reasonable person is someone with whom you can reason. Sort of obvious, but it has to play into our understanding of 1 Corinthians 2, verse 14. Indeed, they cannot understand, because the things of the Spirit of God are spiritually discerned or appraised. Even so, how do you know who's out there who is open-minded? Unless you start talking about it. So you talk about it, and then surprise, surprise, there you have it. There's somebody who's spiritually keen. They're leaning forward. They want to hear. And when that happens, sweet, then you teach them. And then they're going to be persuadable. But we never make decisions for people and say, oh, well, he's an atheist, or I heard her on the radio, she wouldn't listen to me. I don't know. I don't know who would listen to me. I'm not going to determine somebody's hearing until I give them an opportunity. So I usually think in my mind, evangelism is giving someone an opportunity to say yes to Jesus. That's all I'm doing. I'm giving them an opportunity. I'm not saying they have to. I'm not saying they don't have to. I'm saying if you've got the ear to hear, I'm ready to talk to you. Whether it's here in the shop or it's out on the street corners as we hand out flyers or sending out notes and letters and knocking on doors, wearing a Jews for Jesus jumper to the footy, I don't know. Whatever it is, I'm inviting conversation. And if that happens and somebody's listening, sweet. And that's an important text for us to understand. Look what Paul said in verse 13 of 1 Corinthians 2. These things freely given to us by God, which things we also speak. Not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit. So here I'm going to keep speaking. Once I've received things from God, I'm going to speak things from God. And that's how you know if you've really been tuned in. So spiritual with spiritual, thoughts with words. This is key. That we are taking thoughts taught us by God and communicating those to other people. And that's what Paul's doing with the Corinthians. He's not there long. He argued in the beginning and got some to join him. And then he continued to teach those who came in. He had his Thursday night Bible class. There it was. So these things are spiritually appraised. And that's why people say, your religion is ridiculous. And I could never believe in a religion so simple that all you have to do is believe and you're saved? What kind of nonsense is that? What do you believe? And how do you appraise things? That's how we got saved. It's simple enough. When I evaluated my spirituality, or what Isaiah called my righteous deeds, all my righteousness is like a filthy rag, and I compare what God did, I say, well, I'm going to trust Him. Chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians, verse 30, for by His doing you are in Messiah Jesus, who became to us wisdom and righteousness and justification, sanctification. He became all those things that we so desperately long for. Let's quickly cover those. What is sanctification? Making holy, that is iffy, that IFY ending, that suffix, means to make. Justify means to make just. Sanctify means to make sanct or holy. Edify, to make a building, build up. So to justify, God justifies us. He makes us just. He makes us righteous. Cool. So what about all the mitzvahs? What about all the commandments? What about all the mishpat? Well, yeah, that's right. It's good. Do all those things. And yet, if you think the law is about a checklist, you miss it. The law is not a checklist by which we're forgiven and gain approval, but the law is a good thing for us by which we're informed so we know how to live our lives. That, however, is never going to justify me before God. Keeping kosher, not keeping kosher. Keeping Shabbos, not keeping Shabbos. I'm not going to be justified by that. I am going to be able to get along better in life if I do all those things, but I'm not going to be approved by God. That approval comes one way, by the death and resurrection of Messiah. That's why Paul is so convinced. That's what we have to preach. And verse 15 says, he who is spiritual appraises all things, but he himself is appraised by no one. Who has known the mind of the Lord, that He'll instruct him? Is that a quote from Job? I think so. But we have the mind of Messiah. God's given us this mind, this wisdom that is beyond human, and yet it can be worked out very well in the human. So it's the Scriptures, and it's good people teaching us, by the which we are informed and live a good life. And we spiritually tune in. They have a new radio system now. I haven't listened to one. I think this might be one, a digital radio. I don't know how it works. I know how AM works. I know how FM works. But somehow you tune it on a dial that doesn't say dial. I don't know how it works. But it's a different tuning. Even FM is a different tuning than AM. AM, you got 702 and 853, and you got 1120. You got all these numbers. Those numbers don't exist on the FM dial where you got 103.2 and 92.9. And it's all based on the frequencies of sound that are emanating from an antenna. We put our little transistor up and our receiver can receive whatever coming from the antenna. If you have an FM and all that's coming is AM, you're stuck. If you have analog television signal, a receiver at home for another year and a half, you get analog television signal, but in just a year and a half, that TV becomes useless. Everything's going digital, which means there's a signal coming and you have to have the right receiver. That's how this spirituality works. If you've got a spiritual antenna that says, I'm open to things from God, you can hear it and you can receive it. And if you've got your antenna tuned to things of the world, you'll never understand it. That's how simple the apostle is making it. And we who've come to faith have the mind, meaning the receiver of Messiah. That's how this works.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.